What's up guys, Robson here, and today we're going to be talking about camera basics, basically the main things you need to know when using your DSLR or mirrorless camera. Let's check it out. Alright, so pretty much just jumping right into it. Right here we have a Nikon D40X. It's a pretty old camera, but it's just a demonstration. So the main things we're going to talk about today are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now it's probably easier to show on a mirrorless camera because you're able to have like touchscreen, all that stuff. But again, this is just for a demonstration. So we're going to flip it on. You can hear that sound right there. Kind of put it up close to the mic real quick if I can. That sound right there is the shutter. As you can see, that took a picture. If we look back at the image, that took a picture. We do it again. Focus on something. The picture has been taken. That is the shutter. So the shutter speed will basically be how fast that shutter closes. I don't know if this will work or not. Yeah, there you go. So we're going to see if we can kind of get inside the lens here. You can see that shutter close. That is basically called dry fire. You probably don't want to do this with your camera, but this is an older camera, so you don't really care as much. But every time that shutter closes, it is taking a picture. I'm going to delete all these pictures real quick. Give me a second. I don't need any of these. But that is the shutter. Now the shutter speed is how fast that closes. So if we kind of push it up more, you'll see that it kind of does close a bit faster now. Now with the lens on it, the lens basically gives it a place to focus where the basically the image goes through the sensor or through the lens, and while the shutter opens, it takes the picture and it puts it on the image sensor and then closes the shutter, and then boom, you have an image. That's basically it. The shutter speed is just how fast that closes. Most of the time for video, you'll want your shutter speed to be I think it's like 1/2 or something around that of your frame rate. So let's say you're shooting at 60 frames per second. Your frame rate will be 120 or 125 depending on how much your camera has. Or if you're doing 24 frames per second, you'll probably be shooting at 50 or something like that, because that's double, almost double your frame rate. You want to, if you don't have the exact number of the double your frame rate, just go for the closest number. That's what I find works best for me. So if you can't find that number, just find the closest number to it. Preferably the one that's the highest number. And if you're shooting 30, you'll probably be shooting in 60 frames per second, or 60 is going to be your shutter speed, 1/60. Now for aperture. Aperture is basically the light that's being allowed through the lens. You can see as I go in and out, that little thing in the middle gets smaller or wider, depending. That's also the zoom, but that's also determining how much light is coming through the lens. And so depending on how much light is coming through that lens, that depends on how much light is going to hit the sensor. So most of the time for photographers, you want a lower aperture, because that means you'll get that nice crispy blurry background, or and it also means that you're getting more light into the camera, which is better for filmmakers and cinematographers. They'll also want a lower aperture depending on the environment that they want to shoot, so they can get more light into that camera. Now, for a lower aperture, that's probably because you are zoomed in a lot, which sometimes isn't a bad thing, because depending on what kind of lens you have, that compression will also give you a blurry background if you're doing photos and things like that. So just keep that in mind when taking photos or video. You want to make sure that you're looking at your aperture. So if you have a higher aperture, that means that your video is going to be darker. So right now I'm at 5 f.5. So if I turn it all the way up to 10, you can see the video got a lot darker. And if I turn it back up to 5, you can see it looks a lot more natural with light and everything. So that is aperture. We're just going to run through this real quick because my camera's about to die. But next is going to be ISO. That's basically the artificial light inside the camera. So right now I'm at 100 ISO, or 800 ISO. If I turn that down, we're at 100 right now. You can see it's really dark. That means that there's not as much light in the camera as there should be. So we turn that back up to 800. You can see it looks a lot better, and it's just more natural. But if we turn it up to, like, let's say 2000, you can see it's a lot more blown out. It doesn't look as good as 800, so we'll turn that back down to 800 so you can kind of see what the difference of it is. So ISO makes a really big difference when doing your video. You also don't want to turn your ISO up too high in dark scenarios. So we'll turn off this light here, and you'll see if we turn our ISO like all the way up, there's so much grain and it just doesn't look good. So that's also why you need to be paying attention to your lights and your ISO. Those need to work together so you can get the best image possible. So you just have a small ring light here and then this side light, and it looks really good at 800 ISO. So play around with your camera. That's pretty much how I learned how to use my camera. Just play around with the settings and see what you like, see what you prefer. Mess around with the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO. Mess around with all those things until you get a photo that you love. And that's basically it. Let's move on to the outro. We're near the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got some value out of this video on how to use your camera, just the basics of it, the ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed, when doing video and photo. It pretty much works very similar, but there are things that work a lot differently. So, if you learned from this video, leave a like, comment what you want me to. If you want me to elaborate on something, comment down below. I'll be glad to elaborate on something that I didn't. If you like content like this, I do magic, cardistry, photography, filmmaking, things like that. If you like those videos, subscribe, turn on post notifications if you want to get notified every time I upload. That's what that bell is for. Click that, do all or personalize, whichever you really want. And that should be the video. Thank you for watching. Peace.